There we go.
Hello, and welcome everybody to the National Trends in Disability Employment,
or nTIDE,
Lunch and Learn series.
Just a few housekeeping items before we begin.
This webinar is being recorded.
We will post an archive of each webinar each month on our website at www.researchondisability.org/nTIDE.
This site will also provide copies of the presentations, the speakers' bios, full transcripts, and other valuable resources.
As an attendee of this webinar, you are a viewer.
To ask questions of the speakers, click on the Q&A box on your webinar screen and type your questions into the box.
Speakers will review these questions and provide answers during the last section of the webinar.
Some questions may be answered directly in the Q&A box.
If you have any questions following this recording, please contact us at disability.statistics@unh.edu
or toll free at 866-538-9521 for more information.
Thanks for joining us.
And enjoy today's webinar.
Hi, everybody. This is Andrew Houtenville from the University of New Hampshire. Just some quick tips. Can you hear me okay, Kate? Because I noticed the green box didn't move.
Yep, you sound good.
Okay, good. All right, so some tips. Be sure to, if you need to, select the right speaker system in Zoom. You can go down to audio settings or audio. It looks a little different depending on if you're a Mac, if you're in a PC. You can also choose the closed captions. There's a closed caption button somewhere on your Zoom screen, and you can choose to see the subtitles and even view the transcript as it's being produced. All right, let's go ahead and go to the first slide. So today, welcome to the February numbers. So today's March, but we're still working with February numbers because we don't yet have the results for March. My name is Andrew Houtenville. We'll hear from John O'Neill and Denise Rizal. John's from Kessler Foundation, and Denise is from the University Centers on Disability, AUCD. Just a little bit about us. This is a joint effort of the University of Hampshire, Kessler Foundation, and AUCD. This is a special episode that we do in the middle of the month to address things related to COVID, and we provide a few statistics that are beyond what the federal government produces. In part, that's because we wait till we get the survey answers. We get the raw data from the federal government. Today's agenda is, we'll start off with the welcome right now. We'll then go into the numbers, and then we'll open it up. We'll hear from John and Denise, and we'll open it up to Q&A. All right, and there's some interesting things going on policy-wise that could really affect the next couple months. So I urge you to stick around for that discussion. I know the numbers bring you here all the time, but you should stick around for the discussion. All right, so again, slow recovery from the Great Recession, some good news, and then COVID hit. All right, so let's look at the percentage of people who are employed. So we'll do people with and people without disabilities. So the top line is people without disabilities. The bottom line is represents people with disabilities. And this leads us up to March, just before the pandemic really took over the economy and over the country. And what we see is the decline in employment. The percentage employed goes down for both people with and without disabilities during and after the Great Recession. But it continues to decline well into, say, 2013 for people with disabilities. The recovery from the Great Recession didn't really start kicking off until 2014-15. We then actually see a very interesting area when the economy hit full employment in 2016 and 17. We actually see these two lines narrowing together. This was the first time that it's really been seen. Usually the gap, the width of the gap just slows in its width, but here we're actually seeing a little bit of a recovery from a recession. And then we hit March, and so we were seeing some relatively even news over the last 2 years of 2018 and 19. It was kind of flat for people with disabilities, rising a little bit for people without disabilities, and then we get the pandemic. And so the next slide I'll show is a progression of slides that shows the pandemic hitting. So we get this huge drop for both people with and without disabilities. They're graphed on different axes, so that's why the 63% is below the 31% for people with disabilities. But what we see here is a drop from 73.5% to 63.5%. 2%. For people with disabilities, it went from 31.7 to 26.3%. And, this looks a bit like the jump for people without disabilities is steeper. Percentage point wise, it is a bigger jump percentage point wise, but as a percentage of the employed, it's actually a little bit bigger for people with disabilities. There's a 17% jump decline for people with disabilities and only a 15%, 14 or 15% decline for people without disabilities. So percentage wise, but given that disability was already really low, for percentage wise, it actually ends up being a bigger jump for people with disabilities. All right, so we see some recovery in May. We see, this is shortly after the lockdown was being lifted. Companies are learning, getting PPE in place, getting plexiglass in place, social distancing rules is in place. And we see some pretty big increases in April, in May and June. But that's pretty much going to be it. There's a little bit of an increase for people without disabilities in July, a good jump for people with disabilities and without disabilities in August. But let's go through these months up until this is January. What you're seeing is really kind of a flattening out, a little bit of progress. But here for people without disabilities, you see a retrenchment. Certainly this is states like California, Texas, Florida having a lot of difficulties in the fall. And so this, actually the country really in the early winter, these are the hits that we took for the holiday season. And we see that both for people with and without disabilities, a decline over those periods. And so for people with disabilities, it's kind of flat at best. In February, we see a slight rise for people without disabilities, a very, very meager rise, and it probably isn't even a statistically significant rise for people without disabilities, for people with disabilities. And so this past month sees a bit of a recovery for people without disabilities, but not so much for people with disabilities. And I think this is going to be an ongoing concern as things start to open up. This survey is taken in the second week of February. It's always in the second week, or at least the week that has the 12th of the month in it. We're seeing some of the economies around the country kind of open up, and that's probably what's driving that increase for people without disabilities. So that's the story we have so far. Let's snap in the February numbers from the previous year. So we're not even close yet to what we were in the previous February. We're still at quite a distance from there. So there's a lot to be recovered. And most of the recovery happened early in the pandemic. Now I'm going to separate this out and look at the unemployed, both the number of unemployed and then the percentage that are on furlough. We're going to look at that aspect of the pandemic recession. So here are the numbers for both people with and without disabilities on your left, with disabilities on your right. And what you can see here is you see that big jump in April for both people with and without disabilities. And then you see a decline for people without disabilities. You see a decline all the way into October, and then it kind of flattens out. And it flattens out in December and January, maybe even a little bit of an increase in response to the holiday peaks in COVID infections and companies and things starting to lock back down in certain places in the country. For people without for people with disabilities, we see certainly the spike in April and May. June, we see a bit of a recovery. July, but by the time, if we really wanted to kind of look at this, there really hasn't been much recovery, much movement since July, really. Let's snap in February. For February, we actually see people with disabilities, without disabilities kind of staying even. For people with disabilities, we see this increase from January to February. We see an increase in the number of people employed. If we want to kind of snap a line in there, there really hasn't been much progress for people without disabilities since October. I would say that we've been pretty darn flat since, for people with disabilities, have been pretty flat since July, since midsummer. And so, as the pandemic continues and people are staying out of work and not being employed, the longer it takes, the harder it might be to match people up again with employers when the time comes to fully reopen. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the Q&A session. All right, so now we're going to break these two groups, all these bars, into looking for work or temporary layoff. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we had a huge jump in furlough on temporary layoff. And so for people without disabilities, we see it went from 13% of the unemployed to 79% of the unemployed were on temporary layoff. That kind of numbers has never been seen in the US economy. When I look at the overall economy, going back to 1973, furloughs were used when factories, during the gas crises, during the energy crisis, the OPEC oil embargo, it reached as high as 25% of the unemployed. And that was as close as we ever got. So it's 3 times the prior peak experience. For people with disabilities, we see, wrong way. We see a similar jump. 73% of the unemployed people with disabilities were on temporary furlough, temporary layoff. That proportion, as you kind of look all the way to February, you see that, I'm pointing to my screen like I'm pointing to a blackboard, but you see that percentage that are on furlough decline. So this darker blue bar, the bottom bar, gets much smaller as a proportion of the overall unemployed. Same for people without disabilities. It's really been kind of hovering. Again, since about the summer, early fall, there hasn't been much change in the percentage that are on furlough versus the percentage that were on temporary layoff. There was a spike during 30 to 29% of the unemployed people without disabilities, and that representing the holiday time increases around that time in COVID. So let's take a look. So, there is a bit of good news, but we're going to talk a bit more and put some context on this a little bit more in it. But I hesitate to call this good news now that it keeps lasting so long. So we look at the percentage who are engaged in the labor force. And so this is the percentage of people who, of the population, what percentage are employed, looking for work, or on temporary furlough. So they're engaged in the labor market. People who have stopped looking for work, who are no longer on furlough and not working, they're considered out of the labor force because they're not impacting the market for employment. You see the same kind of pattern with the Great Recession, a decline for both people with and without disabilities, a really big decline for people with disabilities. And then you see some recovery and narrowing of the gap for people with disabilities especially during 16 and 17, when the economy started to trip into full employment. People started re-engaging in the labor force and looking for work. You start seeing all those want ads, help wanted signs in the mall, in the shops. That's really that full employment time, but not much progress over the last prior to the pandemic in 2018 and 19. We will see a big decline in February. This is the February number. This is all the numbers we have to date. You see the big decline for people without disabilities as people started exiting the labor market, and then they jump back up, but still have not recovered back. For people with disabilities, you actually see it's been pretty flat, and into the pandemic, there really wasn't, it's been pretty stable, jumping around, and that's perhaps due to sample size. But people, for the most part, have stayed engaged in the labor market. And this could be viewed as good news because they're either staying employed, they're looking for work on temporary furlough. And then there's also the idea that many people with disabilities may have been taking advantage of unemployment benefits. Now, prior to the pandemic, if you wanted unemployment insurance benefits, if you wanted unemployment insurance payments, you had to be actively looking for work or on furlough. However, with the pandemic, you could not be on furlough, not be actively looking for work, but have a condition that would make it dangerous for you to go back to work. And so that exemption and the ability to get unemployment insurance may have stabilized and kept people with disabilities in the labor market. And so that could be a really good thing about that policy, that it not only does it kind of support people who are working and are now it's dangerous for them to go back to work, either because of immunocompromised positions or something related to their condition, made them much more susceptible to COVID. So that may be the reason, that may be one of the reasons why this line has stayed stable. And if those added unemployment benefits, both extended in the duration of time that unemployment insurance can take place, but also that exemption for people going back to work. You don't have to go back to work and you claim unemployment insurance if you have a health condition that makes you more susceptible, which is not all people with disabilities, but probably a fairly substantial portion. That may be what's keeping people in the labor force. And my big concern is that if those kinds of exemptions go away, we'll see a decline in labor force participation in the coming months. If I had to predict it, I have no idea because I don't know what the political and that's environment is going to be like in the next couple months. But Denise is here to answer all our questions about that. I would also say that there is the mask mandates that are starting to come down across the country in various states. And if people with disabilities feel they're put at risk, maybe they had masks going on in the workplace, but now they feel even more compromised because the masks are starting to go away, both with clientele and with coworkers. That as those mask mandates go away, some people with disabilities may go either back to unemployment insurance, may start looking for a different job and be unemployed, or they may leave the labor force altogether. So I see those mask mandates as affecting a certain portion of the population with disabilities. Now, OSHA, and Denise may talk about this more later, OSHA, the Occupational and Safety Health Administration, is considering a nationwide mask mandate for the workplace as a workplace safety issue. And that may kind of maintain people with disabilities in the labor market and working in a more safe environment for longer if they have certain conditions. I'm going to stop there because I know Denise and John are on the phone and I've been talking too long already. But if you have questions, you can use the Q&A box. Our slides will be archived. But you also can take a survey at our researchondisability.org/nTIDE. You can take a feedback survey and give us information about some of the things you'd like us to address, either in this COVID special nTIDE or this or additional nTIDEs in the future. So I'm going to turn it over to John and Denise. John and Denise, you guys want to have anything to say?
Why don't I jump? Can you guys, where's my video? There we go. Why don't I jump, since you just referenced a couple of policy things, and I've been checking since we started talking, actually. So a couple of things to know. Obviously, there's lots going on in the policy space under the new legislation that just passed. So I think I've said to this group before, both on this call and on the beginning of the month calls, the American Rescue Plan does provide a 10% jump in FMAP for home and community-based services for 1 year, which has its own ramifications, but you should know that. Adult children on the economic impacts payments, that is the $1,400 checks. This time, unlike previous times, adult dependents who qualify, income-wise qualify, will get payments. And that's a change. And there's some specific targeted funding to IDEA. So there's some funding targeted under Part B, under Part C, separate funding, Part B, Part C, and the 619 program that's going to states around trying to get kids back to school. Now, on the unemployment piece, as Andrew said, there is extended unemployment that you can apply for. The extension goes, interestingly enough, until Labor Day. And it does continue to include, Andrew, I just checked, that third exemption for people who are, for health reasons under COVID, cannot go back to work. So that does continue at least until that September date. And that is the, and it also includes the $300 increase in unemployment insurance. I mean, all the stuff that had been through March is now through September, as I understand it. The other question you just asked about the OSHA stuff, My understanding is that the any mask mandate, and including what we expect to come out of OSHA, will also include basically an ADA exemption. I mean, ADA is a civil rights law. You can't just waive a civil rights exemption. There will be things you have to show to be able to be under that if you can't wear a mask, that piece of it at least. And then if OSHA does come out with a mask mandate for overall for the country, between those two things, that should help. But that's the answer to one of your other questions that you had. A couple of other things you should know. In addition, under waivers, Medicaid waivers, there has been a whole conversation going on about work requirements, whether states could require under a waiver that somebody either work or volunteer or prove that they're trying to find a job just to stay on your Medicaid. And the previous administration had approved a couple of those, and a number of other states had applied for them. Nothing had gone into effect yet because there have been lawsuits, including one that's supposed to be at the Supreme Court shortly. So what's happened is the Biden administration has reversed all of that, has said, no, we're not going to enforce work requirements. They've asked the Supreme Court to basically to drop the case because it's now moot. The Supreme Court has not done that. They did pull the oral argument and postpone that. And they've asked for additional briefing on the issue. So for all the articles you may have been seeing in the news saying, woo, it's all over. It's not quite all over yet. We're hopeful, but it's not quite all over yet. The states that are in the Supreme Court opinion are Arkansas and New Hampshire. And apparently what happened was the administration asked Arkansas and New Hampshire to withdraw the case because of these reasons. Arkansas refused. I'm not sure what New Hampshire did actually, but Arkansas refused to withdraw. So anyway, that continues. We'll see. And the whole argument is that making a work requirement under Medicaid does not promote the reason of the Medicaid statute. Medicaid is for healthcare. Work is not required for that. The states where they had tried to do work requirements include Georgia, Indiana, Nebraska, Ohio, South Carolina, Utah, Arizona, Michigan, New Hampshire. Well, I had New Hampshire before, and Wisconsin. They have been told the work requirement will no longer be, required under. They cannot have a work requirement under their waiver. So now some of them are obviously pushing back on that, but that's what they've been told. Did you say something, Andrew? Okay. So that's, you should know that. The other one you should know is the public charge requirement, where basically there was a conversation about whether if you were on the public dole in any way, you could be denied a variety of other services as an immigrant. And that has also been reversed. So some interesting things happening. We don't have all the answers yet. There clearly are some changes being made from this administration, both by the new legislation and by pulling of regulations or guidances that have been out there. But we don't have all the answers yet to what all those things will mean. So there you go, Andrew. That's kind of the answers to what I know, and I'm sure there will be more questions.
Yeah. Okay. John, any thoughts?
Unfortunately, I lost my connection for a minute or two and I didn't hear your questions, but anyway, I have been checking in with JobPath, which is a supported work program in New York City that I happen to sit on their board. And there have, at least in the last time I talked to them was in December, and they had about 28% of their participants, 69 out of 242 who were on furlough. And that's defined relatively loosely for them. It's basically where employers intend on taking them back. And currently, there are about 55 or 23% that remain on furlough. So some people are going back to work, not in great numbers quickly. There are a couple of interesting kind of unexpected benefits to being working during the COVID era for people with disabilities, at least in this supported work program. For example, many of these folks work in companies in positions where there's quite a bit of turnover, and but they have been in those jobs for a long time, and they have seniority, so they're some of the first being asked back
Yeah.
Into jobs. Also, there are a lot of people who are going back to jobs that may have, or into new jobs that may have orientation requirements. Because these individuals during the epidemic and have not been working, they've been on furlough, quote unquote. The job path has been doing quite a bit of career development virtually with these folks, which has sort of stabilized the organization's income, but it's also been a plus because many of these folks, as they go back to work, are being oriented remotely, and they now have tablets and internet connection that they probably wouldn't have had prior. So that's been an advantage in terms of returning to work, particularly when organizations are requiring orientation remotely.
Yeah.
So those are a couple of thoughts. Some of the sectors that are opening up are the sports, and some of the entertainment venues are beginning to open up, not the theaters, not the Broadway, but others. And people are going back to work in those sectors to some degree, slowly, but they are going back to work.
Yeah.
Also, families are still very hesitant, particularly families living in the boroughs. Let's take the Bronx, for example. There are a number of folks that JobPath serves who live in the Bronx, and they live in multi-generational families, probably in relatively small quarters. And parents are very hesitant for these folks to take public transportation to their jobs, and they're refusing for their adult offspring to return to work, even if vaccines are even after folks have been vaccinated. So that's some news from the local community.
Yeah.
in New York
It
City.
shows a lot of the context that families are facing. It's not, this is a very different world of making decisions about the family and about employment and about income. Denise, you were about to say something?
Yeah, I was, only because we got a question that I answered by typing, but then I thought, probably other people are asking this question as well. And we've gotten it before. The $1,400 check does not count as an asset for Medicaid eligibility. It doesn't count against SSI, SSDI, or Medicaid eligibility. So, and I know $1,400 is a lot of money for that purpose. So I want to make sure I say that out loud to everybody else.
Yeah. So there are a couple interesting questions that we've also received. Thank you for responding to that. I was going to reread that because I saw your answer go in. I'm like, oh, we need to have that answered live.
Yes.
So there's a question. The first question was, do we know much about the persistent unemployment for people with disabilities is due to the fear of greater susceptibility to severe COVID reaction? So that's an interesting question. And I looked they added some questions about COVID to the labor survey that we use here in nTIDE. And they added 5 new questions. And whether someone is susceptible or someone in a household is susceptible is not addressed in these questions. It's probably, I mean, they asked so many good questions. I would imagine it was probably one of the ones they considered asking. But I looked at another survey that the Census Bureau is doing, and none of the questions get exactly to someone's susceptibility. They talk about fear of COVID, but we don't know whether they're a person with a disability. In that survey, we don't have, well, they're a person with a disability and they have a fear. They just talk about general fear of COVID, not in relation to your personal health circumstances or family members' health circumstances. So unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a way in the data that I know of, the two places I would go to look for the data have this kind of question, but it's a really, really important question. And, unfortunately with the unemployment insurance claims, we don't know what to the degree to which somebody we don't get data from them about disability either. So it's kind of a missing gap, and there will be some important public comment periods coming up in the future about health equity. And I know that our good friend Andy Imperato is part of the health equity group that the Biden administration has put together to talk about the future and what kind of information we need to respond. No worries, Denise. And so, I think this is a really important question about people's susceptibility. The US has a lot of privacy considerations, and all these surveys are all kind of limited to the degree to which we can attach really detailed health information to. So sorry, I don't have an answer. I think, do we know how much persistent unemployment for people with disabilities due to a greater fear of susceptibility? The answer is no, we don't have such information, I'm sorry to say. Another question is, are there any changes in industries where people with disabilities are working? I have many clients working for state and county programs for the first time due to the ability to work from home. So that is one of the questions that has been asked in the survey that we're working with. And I know that folks at the Office of Disability Employment Policy are analyzing that data, and I wish I remembered their responses. So if you email us, I can follow up and send you some information about that. But if I remember their results correctly, that there has been some benefit, but not there has been some benefit to opening up work from home, whether it's in addition to what would have happened without the pandemic. I think that's hard to say. So I'm sorry, I don't have too much of an answer for that one. I think that some of the ODEP stuff would be of interest to you though. All right, so I see a lot of people choosing to retire and not return to jobs for safety reasons, or they have moved their retirement dates in order and not return to work. This may not be the case for people with disabilities and should be noted in the comparison. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. There is a way, unfortunately, when they ask people, why are you not looking for work? Why are you not working? They give people a choice of disability or retirement or some other reason. And so if they let them choose two, so we don't, a lot of people may be saying, I'm retiring because of my disability, or I'm not. So I wish, this is one of those cases where instead of a single option, I wish they allowed people to answer both questions. But people with disabilities are in general older. One way we could potentially look at this is by looking at, say, we typically use the number that the BLS uses, age 16 to 64 is our age range. We could look at 16 to say 55. And that would kind of peel that out. And so that's a really interesting idea. That early retirement, I know that many employers, in order to reduce payrolls, even because employers at the University of New Hampshire did this, where we offered early buyout packages to people, and most people over 55, now that I'm 54, almost 55, disability has onset with age as well. So unfortunately, in our data, we're not able to look at people who have late onset versus early onset. Onset is a big kind of missing variable in this. So thank you, John, for your question. Susan has a statement, a comment. Personal experience is that changes to unemployment requirements had kept my family member with a disability as employed. This has been very empowering factor for my adult daughter during the pandemic. She had to stop working as a personal care assistant last March because her compromised immune system. Working as a PCA was the sole major empowering factor in her life. Thank you for advocating for a change in unemployment policy. Yeah, I mean, she's still a part of the labor market, right? She's the idea is that when the pandemic is over, there's the expectation that she will go back to work as a personal care assistant. And I see that my own personal experience. I have a family member who's very similar with immune compromised, and a very similar experience, that it kind of keeps people, the expectation is still of work and that you're apart. So even if you're conservative, on the conservative side of the political spectrum, there's the expectation that people will go back to work. If you're on the other side of the spectrum, the liberal side of the spectrum, people are staying engaged in society. And so employment of people with disabilities is very much a bipartisan deal, right? Paying taxes and integrated into society. And so it's not surprising me that the ADA was a bipartisan. I might be overspeaking. I'm not big on politics, but it was signed by a Republican president, so George Bush Sr. So, all right. Still grappling with how to explain this data to the media. How would you simply? How would you simply explain how COVID has impacted people with disabilities in the workforce? I need a dumbed down answer. I think the answer is, all right, let me keep it to John and Denise. You guys can keep thinking of clean sentences. Let me type in live so that this get marked. All right, so I would say that both people with and without disabilities, people with disabilities have been hit by the pandemic like as everyone else has. So it's not a big different story. There is evidence to suggest that the decline in employment was larger for people with disabilities in the initial hit in April and May. Percentage-wise, that's the case. Percentage point-wise, not so much, but given that people with disabilities were already low, the proportion of working people who declined, so now we're starting to, all right, so let's start again. The employment of people with disabilities was hit by people with and without disabilities equally in April, with some evidence that it was a bit deeper for people with disabilities. A lot of improvement occurred for people without disabilities through the summer and into the fall until the holiday season hit. Unfortunately, people with disabilities, that improvement really appeared to have stopped during the early to midsummer. That after April and May and maybe into June, there was some improvement, but there really hasn't been much improvement since. And there is big concern, and I'm trying to come up with a single word. Elaine Katz and I and John and Denise and others talked earlier today, and there's a concern about, and here's the term, rematching, right? So rematching, so many people with disabilities are in customized type jobs that are very specific. They have workplace accommodations. And as the economy and the health environment improves with COVID and the vaccines rolling out, there's a concern that it's been so long, it's almost a full year for many people that have been out of the workplace, that rematching them to jobs might be difficult. And so if you think of John's example was, there was seniority attached to who got invited back to work first. But if you're invited back to work, but you have a health condition and say, no, I can't do it, someone else might come in before you. And so is your job going to be there? I think that many firms have learned how to work more with less employees. And so there may be this rematching problem, this reintegration problem. Elaine made the point that the employment rates for people with disabilities really hasn't changed much over the last 30 years. If you look at the long-term trend, other than the business cycle, the only improvement in that employment gap between people with disabilities, only in 2016 and 17 did we really see a narrowing. And so it's been really a long-term affair. Also, Elaine mentioned in her comments that there's been some intersectionality to this, that certain populations, urban and not urban, ethnic and ethnic, well, there's certainly been true for urban, rural, suburban, there are some differences, but there's been some work at Rutgers University. Doug Cruz at Rutgers has teased these things out by racial and ethnic minority status. So how did I do, Lynn? Did I answer? Did I give you a succinct answer enough? It's hard to do this kind of over time discussion. So big hit in the beginning, some evidence that it was a little bit bigger for people with disabilities. There hasn't been much movement for people with disabilities since midsummer. People without disabilities, it went into still struggling. Oh, come on, Lynn, go back to the recording, and I said it all right. All right. All right, so John, Denise, any final comments? Looks like there's another Q&A.
No. There's lots
don't
still to
think so.
figure out. I think that's the question. Keep watching. There's more coming.
Yeah.
And we're just gonna have to see. There is there's a new return to work bill that we're gonna see soon that, we'll see. There's some disability language in it, but I don't know how that'll play out yet. And it has to pass. So there's another piece. There's an apprenticeship bill out there that we hope will be helpful, but again, it has to pass, and there's some disability language in it, but you're just going to have to keep watching. I will say this administration it does have disability on the agenda as we look at all of this.
Yeah.
So, and there's someone who is in a disability specific position on the Domestic Policy Council at the White House, which also I think, I'm not trying to be political about this at all, but that helps. Having somebody on the council helps. So we'll just have to watch and see.
Who is that person?
Oh, her name is Kim Kneckstadt. If you know Kim, she worked for Representative Bobby Scott in the House, and then she went and worked for Senator Murray in the Senate, and she is now the disability person on the Domestic Policy Council at the White House. And it's the first time there has been a disability specific person on the Domestic Policy Council. It's a really big deal. And Kim is really talented, and she gets who we are and what we want.
Yeah, the Domestic Policy Council is really, really high level. So it's on the same level as the National Security Council and the Council of Economic Advisors, two of the things you'll hear in the news all the time. And it kind of spins around in the background. It never really hits the media like the NR, the NSA or not NSA, National Security Council, or the National, the Economic, well, those.
One last thought I had in terms of return to work. There are some, at least in New York State, the Developmental Disability Agency is funding on-the-job training. They're basically using those funds to incentivize employers to bring people back to their jobs. So I thought that was a good sort of funding policy change.
Good.
And that's at the state level.
at the state level,
Yeah.
correct. Also, JobPath has been, they pride their relationships with their employers. And for individuals that are not returning because of whatever reason they have or their families have, they've been filling those jobs with other people, thus maintaining the relationship, the demand side relationship. So I think that's really, really wise.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think the next couple months it's a treacherous time, and some of the proof is going to, the proof is in the pudding, or something hits the fan. I don't know what the acronym, but it's going to be really challenging. I just ran across a component of the Rescue Act. Is that what we're going to call it? The Rescue Act? That the CDC has several $billion to go after health equity.
Yeah.
And, some of this is, health equity issue about, not just access to healthcare, but access to a healthy environment and a healthy workplace. And I got the message through people I know through OSHA. And, some of these issues could be addressed with that money. And it's going to be really fast acting. I think the applications are due at the end of March. Unfortunately, it's only big states and cities and counties.
But I think that's a good point, Andrew. I think that looking at health equity, again, all of the things that we're seeing from CDC, and we are doing some work with CDC around vaccine hesitancy and around some other things. All of the work that we're seeing from CDC certainly recognizes the health equity issues that people with disabilities face.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's again, for those of us who have been in the field for a long time, and I'm not criticizing CDC particularly, but just in general, that hasn't always been the case.
Yeah.
So, so that's important, and the intersectionality of disability and race and ethnicity and location, geography, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
I think is also something that through this crisis has come to the fore in a way that it hasn't before.
I'm optimistic that we'll have some disability related vaccine information in terms of uptake and receipt of the vaccine. It hasn't been put out yet, but there are efforts to try to collect that data out there. And I wouldn't be very surprised to see disparities and inequity in the distribution, because 30% of the population with disabilities live in a household or family in a poverty environment. And those are the areas and geographic locations that are being largely struggling with distribution for vaccines. And so my guess is once we get that data, and it will happen, knock on wood, but in the next couple months, there might be information about that vaccine hesitancy as well. Denise, we should talk at some point because.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Okay. There's one more question in the Q&A. John's point, job path relationship with employers is critical in success, critical in the success rate in returning to work. Key lesson for future and job agencies and job developers. Yeah, and Lynn Bergman sent out a link to a media piece that she's worked on.
Sure.
All right, so everybody, thank you very much. And I think we're going to call it for the day. All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for sticking with us. Hope you found the data interesting and everything you wanted from data and more. Thank you, John. Thank you, Denise. Everybody, have a good afternoon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.